in hosting a podcast, I think there's different considerations that maybe overlap, but there's different considerations to take into account when it comes to teamwork and ultimately effectively working together towards a common goal, where communicating that intention in advance, like I talked about values before, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, I'll talk to my editor and say, hey, we've got, I don't know, X amount of conversations that we need to sort through and get edited before this date. So what works best for you to pace it if we do one every so often, two every so often, so you can balance work, you can balance your workload, what works for you? And then me being flexible or learning to be flexible in that process. Because it's not just what I want, force feeding what I need to happen. I think ultimately to get what transacting value audiences or what I want, what they want, in terms of quality and capability and consistency, well, then I have to be willing to be flexible and open-minded and work with other people.
How do we take our communication and podcasting skills to the next level? Josh was on the show toward the end of last year, where we talked about his experiences as an active duty Marine and the lessons he learned when he was deployed overseas, exploring values, systems, and human connection. If you haven't listened to it, go ahead and hit the pause button now and check it out. You will get so much out of it. I asked him to return this year to catch us up on how he's doing and how it's going with his show, the Transacting Value podcast. We pick up our conversation pretty much where we left off last time, focused on the importance of values. This time, we take it a little further and discuss how values can make or break your podcasting experience. You'll find a wealth of knowledge in this episode, even if you are not a podcaster. So listen up and apply that knowledge. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. I'm your host, Jennifer Furlong. So guess what? We have a return guest, and I am super excited to have this conversation with Josh because it's been a while since I had him on the show. A lot of things have changed for him, a lot of progression, a lot of challenges that he has been able to kind of overcome, with his podcast, and he's just growing and just getting bigger and bigger. And I'm really impressed with all of the work that he's doing, which is why I'm so excited to have him back on the show. I know it's going to be a really fantastic and interesting conversation, and we are going to learn a lot, of course, focused on communication and how we can learn and grow and improve as communicators. So, Josh, first of all, or Porter, excuse me, how do you like to be referred to on I know you like to go by Porter on the podcast, but when you're a guest, do you prefer Josh or do you prefer Porter?
Yeah, so when it comes to transacting value, basically I try to portray a character, right? And it gives me an opportunity to host with a little bit of intentional distance and communicate, authentically and vulnerably, but on topics maybe that I'm just personally not ready to own and talk through, right?
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so here and now, yeah, Josh is fine, but
okay. So
on the show I go by Porter. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So no masks. No masks. No. This is all you.
That's it. I am Iron Man. Yeah.
Y'all, we're going to have Josh get a little vulnerable today. We're going to see how he fares with that.
Here we go. I might blush a little, but let's see what happens.
So you're still active duty, correct, in the Marine Corps? So that's still the same. All right. And still got the podcast going on. I know that that's growing and thriving. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I know you're doing some writing, like you're really getting down in the creative space here. You're really doing things, shaking and moving. So I really want to have a conversation about that as well. Yeah, so the last time we talked was, I think it was August, but your episode in season 2 came out in September. Yeah. So why don't we catch the audience up on just a quick, I'm going to say, make sure that y'all go back and listen to the first episode, by the way, episode 41, so you can get caught up. But just real quickly, let the audience know who you are, just a quick background bio, so we can just make sure anybody who is new to listening to this, they'll have a good understanding of who you are.
Sure. And Jen, first, I got to say, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the opportunity. But like 44, episode 44 for you back in September, right?
Yeah.
And then what are you at now? 50 something, high 50 something, 60 something.
Yeah. 50 something. Yeah. Late 50s.
Sure. Right. Like, holy crap. Look at all the progress you've made. It's in almost a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. So I bring that up to say that all of this podcasting space and this industry has really, I think, benefited everybody. It's like there's a guy that came on to Transacting Value and we talked. His name's Larry, and he said, a rising tide raises all ships. And I think that's totally true in the podcasting industry right now. The notoriety, the professionalism, capabilities, not to mention AI considerations and language learning, but just in general, people's ability to communicate through auditory learning or visual now, right? Like with videos on YouTube as well for podcasts, has revolutionized the game. You think, 20 years in, maybe, give or take, for podcasting, and how far it's come. You're like 8, 9, 10 months of growth is ridiculous. What you've been able to do in your branding and your ability to obviously bring back now season 3 of your podcast, right? So super cool what you've been able to do. I just want to make sure that I put it out there, because for everybody watching this, if this happens to be your first video watching with Jen or Communication 24/7, super cool. I appreciate it. However, you're missing some crazy stuff over the first 2 seasons too. So, man, super cool growth that you've got.
Oh, I appreciate that. And it's not easy. It's hella work.
Seriously, it's pretty, but it's good. It's good hella work, That's yeah, it's not telework, it's hella work. I think that's what I'm going to call it now.
Yeah.
But, all that being said, since August, September, I guess about a year ago, I realized in trying to start a podcast, and 2, as a startup a media company, too many things to juggle. And I didn't have the skill set, the intelligence. I had plenty of ignorance, I guess, is about all I had. And
I don't think any of us are short of that. So you're
hey, that's it. That's it. It's all about the networking, I think I heard you say recently on your show. And, having clarity or increasing amounts of it has made all the difference for me. So I found some super awesome people to work with now, contractors, freelancers, right? That, I mean, man, the skill sets, the quality, the caliber, I'll tell you this, the first thing that we talked about before I brought them in to work on anything was their value systems. And I think in front loading that and showcasing that that's something I'm more willing to focus on overtly with anybody I work with, I think it's really mitigated a lot of the issues we could have had. And so it's been stupid smooth working with them. But because now I'm working with them, it's also given me more time to focus on clarity for the show and for this media company.
That's right.
In messaging, in branding, in imagery, in actual communication skills, and figuring out how to be more, I guess you could say, intentional with what I'm trying to say without seeming so boring and deliberate that I'm taking too long to process.
Right. Yeah.
Man, learning to prepare before talking to somebody, right? A little research goes a long way.
Yep.
A lot of research doesn't go very far at all. And that's sort of the balancing act, right? You go too far into it, especially with like your show being unscripted, mine's not scripted. It gets too rigid if you research too much. And finding balances like that, right, has made all the difference. So yeah, now, man, working on a nonfiction book series. I'm working on a fiction novel. Obviously building out this media company and then Transacting Value, just building growth, the website. and working through what to do with it and what direction to take it, plus clarity throughout the whole process and continuity in the mix. Yeah, I guess you could say has made for a pretty growth filled year.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
in between all of that, trying to find some time to put that uniform on and actually
Oh
do
man.
it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And to be fair, that's the one thing I don't have to find time for. Other people find my time to do that for me. So
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, I I don't get a say in that
Schedule
in
is
some ways.
set.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
great workaround. So
Yeah.
let's focus in because there has been so much that you have experienced over this past year in terms of growing as a podcaster, as a creator. Communication skills, of course, are going to be at the heart of your ability to be able to do all of that effectively. One of the things that I wanted you to talk about just real quickly for the audience, as a part of that growth, a lot of people will look at podcasters and think, "Oh, it's you and you have your mic and you just kind of get on there and you say whatever you want and then that's it. That's all there is to it." But really, I have been able to develop such a fantastic core of people who are just so incredibly helpful to me,
Mhm.
and I may not necessarily employ them or, even have them on the show, but I'm beginning to see how this really, even though this is my show, it's still somewhat kind of like a team effort because I still have conversations with other podcasters and get insight from them and learn from
Yeah.
them. And, so it really is, you do have to be able to play well with others, I think, still, if you're going to be
Oh yeah.
successful in this. Has that been your experience?
Oh yeah. Hands down. 100%, right? It's
Yeah.
and it's not even just recording for the podcast. I mean, it's all encompassing to be able to podcast effectively,
Mhm.
right? Like at some point when we're recording, you may hear the dogs in the hallway,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Well, that's how it goes, right? But so then ensuring that I've done what I can to prepare in advance.
Yep.
Uh,
But you gotta go with the flow too.
well, that's it, right? But you try to keep the dogs downstairs,
Right.
and so I need help with that when the doors close. You know what I mean? So things like that, all the way up to in producing a podcast, in hosting a podcast. I think there's different considerations that maybe overlap, but there's different considerations to take into account when it comes to teamwork and
Mhm.
ultimately effectively working together towards a common goal.
Mhm.
Where communicating that intention in advance, like I talked about values before, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, I'll talk to my editor and say, hey, we've got, I don't know, X amount of conversations that we need to sort through and get edited before
Mhm.
this date. So, what
Mhm.
works best for you to pace it if we do one every so often, two every so often, so you can balance work, you can balance your workload? What
Mhm.
works for you? And then me being flexible or learning to be flexible in
Right.
that process. Because it's not just what I want,
Yeah.
force feeding what I need to happen.
Mhm.
I think ultimately to get what transacting value audiences or what I want, what they want, in terms of quality and capability and consistency, well, then I have to be willing to be flexible and open minded and work with other people.
Yeah.
Uh, a little creative license goes a long way, but I can't exhibit that without licensing other people to do the same.
I
It's not
wanna I wanna point something out real quick before you
always.
continue. This is a communication thing. It's a communication skill, and I don't even know if you're aware that this is something that you have developed that was a really good way to approach this person that you're working with as far as editing.
Mhm.
You you led with a clear indication of what you would like to have happen, right? There's X number of episodes we need to get through, or there's X number of minutes that we need to make sure that we get out, of a
Yeah.
particular episode. You're very clear in what it is that you're expecting from them, you're hoping to get from them, while at the same time being thoughtful and asking them to come up with a solution on how to make that happen. I don't know if you were like, did you go into that intentionally, like knowing this is how I'm going to approach this, so I don't come across as, like this mean person who is just going to be dogging on this person to get this stuff done? Were you intentional in that, or is that just something that you feel like maybe I've just kind of learned that along the way? I've made some mistakes in my time, and this is a result of learning from those mistakes.
Yes and no. I didn't intend to be accommodating.
Mm-hmm.
No. And I guess ironically enough, I didn't intend to be that courteous because I was pretty one-track minded.
Yeah.
I figured, okay, I need to, read the metrics and look at the analytics and make these changes and do what's popular and get this podcast going, whatever. Especially within that first year.
Yeah.
I was just, narrow-minded, I guess. What did come out of that, though, is a lot of lessons learned based on my experience. And I think in large part because of that, I've just, in the last year alone, grown to value experiential learning probably over anything else. One, it fits my learning style a little bit better. I'd prefer to do things than any other means or method or mode or whichever applies. But being able to have more time now that I'm working with other people as a team to produce this podcast and, get it out to people, that it's also given me an opportunity, like I said, to increase clarity, right? And some of that is, what experience do I bring to the table? What are my strengths that I bring to the table? And how am I willing to compliment other people, not have them compliment me? And I think that's been a pretty big driving factor for me. So a little bit of that was intentional.
Yeah.
It's certainly not all of it.
Yeah. But that was well done. That was a really nice way to model how to have a conversation like that with someone that you're trying to have them complete some work, for you, and to give them the space to be able to do that in a way that they're going to be able to achieve it and not fail at it.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Yeah.
So your speech teach, like that's you, that's your thing, right? So from TEDx to classrooms to podcasts, like you talk about talking.
Yeah.
So what have you seen? Is it more effective to make mistakes early and learn, or go in with a plan that has proven based on your experience to be effective and then maybe shift and change later? What's more appropriate and effective?
StreamYard provides easy live streaming and recording, allowing you to stream to multiple online platforms all at one time. Whether you're a creator, a content marketer, business, or just someone with something to say, StreamYard is the way to spread your message and engage with your audience. You can host virtual events, grow your business, inspire your followers, and create a movement. Try StreamYard today for free by clicking on the link in the show notes. I think when you are younger, you have to be willing to give yourself permission to be human and not be afraid to go into different communication scenarios. You have to be willing to make those mistakes so that you can learn. Now, as you grow as a communicator, you have a responsibility to be able to take those lessons and apply those lessons, and so ideally, as you move up the ladder, whether you're in your career or in your relationships, the longer you're with someone, we have a responsibility to those we communicate with to make sure that we're employing the communication skills in a way that's ethical and that we know is going to be, it's going to be effective. And so I think you have to give yourself some license, the younger you are, but the more we're aware of communication, I think the more our responsibility grows with communication. Yeah. We absolutely have to be mindful, but even when, speech teach here. Absolutely. And I have the words communication expert, right, on everything. That does not mean I don't make mistakes. Absolutely not. There are days where I make all kinds of communication mistakes. I will piss you off because I'll say something that maybe I didn't intend it to go that way, or maybe I'm not listening as effectively as I should be. That's a big one. That's one that I actively try to work on every single day because I'm not naturally an empathetic person. Like people laugh at that, but no, seriously, I have to work hard at the empathy because I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, life sucks, things happen, but kind of like get over yourself and figure it out. let's
Well,
let's
maybe,
move on.
yeah. Well, and maybe that's
Not
where it came
everybody responds to that, well. So I
from.
have to be mindful of that depending on who I'm talking to. You have to learn how
Yeah.
to read people and then, be able to kind of adapt to that situation.
Well, okay, but I mean, you've had to adapt, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
here's an
Oh,
example.
yeah.
We're just talking about this before we started this, right? But
Mhm.
your season 3 trailer, the one you just put out
Yeah.
recently,
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff you had to adapt to,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
But
Big time.
yeah, but ultimately, even based on some of your social media posts, a lot of that stuff has been, I mean, isolated to this one instance, but self-reliance and growth the whole
Mm-hmm.
way through, over the last 3 or 4 decades
Mm-hmm.
has been
Yeah.
you learning how to work through stuff
Yeah.
internally,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe not on your own. You've had
Mhm.
a team, so to speak, but a network, I guess. But you still have to take the ownership and work through some of that stuff. Do you
Absolutely.
find not to ask you too many questions, but
No.
um,
This is what makes our conversation so great.
yeah, I'm just curious, right? Like, well, like you said, the communication expert to me means because you've been able to learn enough through your
Mhm.
own experiences that other people may be willing or actually want to learn without
Mhm.
having the same experience just to
Yeah.
learn from you, right? So
Yeah.
your expertise is
Mhm.
in your experience and your life,
Yeah.
your perspective, right? So
Yeah.
have you maybe found that some of your self-reliancy bleeds over to your I guess labeling of other people's capabilities and putting that on other people, like some of these communication errors you talked about.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should be able to understand what I'm saying because I understand what I'm saying,
Right.
right?
It certainly can. It certainly can shade the way I view my interactions with others.
Yeah.
And that can, it can be a good thing, but it can also be a challenging thing because not everybody comes from similar circumstances. And that's what the entire platinum rule was all about, right? Treating others the way they want to be treated. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that you have to always acquiesce. That doesn't mean that you always have to accommodate. You certainly can be honest in your communication. You can be truthful. You can be direct while also trying to be understanding of the
Mhm.
other person. It's really difficult to do that because sometimes it's like, I just want to tell you what I think you need to hear, and guess what? It's going to make you uncomfortable, and that's okay. You're just going to have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. But if you're in any type of a relationship, whether it's a friendship or even in the office space, sometimes you're going to have those difficult conversations. But I think if you're direct about it, and you kind of talk your way through it, like this is going to be a difficult conversation. It's going to be uncomfortable for both of us, but it's also
Mhm.
something that I think we need to have to be able to get past this. And I want us to be able to get past this. I think, that's something that I've learned to do over time when you have difficult conversations like that.
Well, then
But
who's it?
something else I wanted to point out though, real quickly, is
Okay,
that
yes.
there's no magic bullet. There's no magic phrase or communication tool or anything that will work in every single scenario. And that's the challenging part. I have had students that'll ask, so what should I do in this situation or what should I say? And
Yeah.
I would always say, well, it depends. I mean, it depends on who is the person, what's the situation, what time of day are we talking about, who's in
Yeah.
the audience. So there is a lot that can go wrong, and there's a lot that will go wrong. So you just have to be willing to say, well, that sucked and that hurt, I won't do that again, lesson
Yeah.
learned, and then apply it, or try to apply it to the next scenario that comes up. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, that's sort of the point too, right?
Mhm.
Identifying, well, like you said, I think you need to hear something in a
Mhm.
more direct format, whatever the something
Yeah.
is.
Mhm.
I think you need to hear it,
Yeah.
right? Okay, well, I don't think I need to hear it from you, right? So
Yeah.
who's right, right? Like it's like you said when you came on transacting value. I don't
Mhm.
remember which at which point, but
Mhm.
one of the two. You said conflict is a natural part of life,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
right? And I don't think that it matters now in hindsight. I don't think that it matters identifying that it's natural
Mhm.
necessarily. Once you've become aware of it, it doesn't
That's
really go
right.
away, right? Like you're like, all right, conflict's here. Or necessarily who was right in saying my perspective, vice my perspective is more right.
Yeah.
But that the fact that if both people are able to understand my perspective is different than yours, but here's what we have in common and where we can at least get to a yes,
Mhm.
well, then we'll just start from there because we don't have to agree on everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, a lot of that, a lot of that, I think I've gotten just throughout my life, experiencing life and people and deployments and whatever active duty isms come with that,
Mhm.
recruiter tag of travel. But also, my divorce, a lot
Mhm.
of it was just, man, conflict and communication
Yeah.
or how we conversed.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
it. There were good times. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it was all miserable. I learned a lot. I enjoyed it. And she's an awesome person.
Mhm.
However, both of our communication skills really didn't complement the other's way of interpreting them,
Right.
and so it
Right.
caused problems, right? And
Yeah.
and the conflict that we experienced became unnatural,
Right.
and
Mhm.
but it also became our baseline.
Yeah.
Um, so interpreting a lot of that, and then I guess you could say over the last 18 months or so now, working through and growing and building transacting value, that forms a lot of the underpinning where
Mhm.
it's rooted in relationships. But
Yeah.
and I put this on Twitter here recently too, but primarily two things, right? One, it's totally possible to get to know a stranger within a conversation that's values based.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
totally on the assumption and understanding that you have nothing else in common. All right,
Right.
that's the baseline. But secondly, it's possible to do that in 30 to 40 minutes.
Mhm.
And showcasing those 2 points exclusively now in transacting value, I think has to come with an awareness that we have all these things that are different between the two of us, whoever's contributing on the show and myself, that are different between
Mhm.
the two of us. But that doesn't mean everything's different. And so
That's
the
right.
ownership that you brought up, I think, at least more specific to my experience, has to revolve more around choosing to heal or choosing
Mhm.
to view something differently or choosing to identify commonalities and also choosing to acknowledge the differences and choosing to talk through differences, choosing to actively listen, like you brought up, vice choosing to prove a point.
That's right. Yeah.
And, and a lot of those, they're not even communication secrets. They're just,
Mhm.
I think, unawarences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you
There's
don't
a
think about it, it's not there.
Yeah, there's self-serving bias that exists out there. We have this amazing ability, the human animal. We have this amazing ability that when things happen to us,
Mhm.
if something great happens, usually we'll want to take credit for it, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got this promotion because I'm so awesome, right? Or I was able to buy this whatever because I saved up my money, and I deserve this.
Yeah.
Um, or I got this A because I worked so hard. I deserved this A. But then when something bad happens, we tend to what? We'll want to
Cast
we'll
it
shove
somewhere
it
else.
into somebody else's
Yeah.
responsibility, or oh, that person got the promotion. because they're an ass kisser, right? It's not because they worked really hard. I didn't get the promotion because they're an ass kisser, or, I wasn't able to purchase a scar because I didn't get that raise because my boss is an ass, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's that self-serving bias. And I think that's the key. We have to be willing, like you said, with the choices that we make, we have to be willing to peel back those layers and call ourselves out on those kind of things. You had mentioned going through a divorce, and I mentioned this to you previously, being fresh from my own divorce. One of the things that I have learned recently is I don't want to be a bitter person. Although I know I will have bitter moments, but I don't want to be bitter about it.
Yeah.
Now, how I communicate and my behavior, that's going to be a direct reflection of where my head is at in the moment. And so I might slip up and I might say something snide. I might say something mean. But so that's something that as a communicator, that's my responsibility to gauge that. Where is my mind at? How am I feeling in this moment? And how is that going to impact my ability to communicate effectively?
Well, and that's it, right? Like you've got to choose to be an active participant in how you communicate with people.
Yeah.
And saying that, I think it's also important to note that you can totally have a shitty attitude.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you a shitty person.
Yeah.
You can be bitter, you can be depressed, you can be happy and frustrated and angry.
In that moment.
Yeah, pick an emotion.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to define who you are as a person.
That's right.
The awareness, though, has to come in too and sort of complement that. And it only takes one person or a group of people to see you acting on those particular emotions for them and their perception to try to define you as a person.
That's right.
Right? Now, you can change that. Well, maybe not. You can influence that, though. Right? Like, we talked about this before, and obviously when you were working with public affairs, that the perception is reality is the saying.
Yeah. Yep,
but I don't think that it is, though. Yeah. I think the perception dictates somebody else's reality.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to define who you are as a person. There's one point that you brought up. I don't really want to keep relegating back to your trailer because you've got so many other cool conversations.
Yeah. Since
that season 3 trailer came out, but I have to because that's where the point was. You said basically that you're choosing how to interpret how your divorce affects you and impacts you and what you say and what you do, right? Like it's you need to move through that, and it's important to talk through that and work through that, and now you're at a better place to be able to do that.
That's right.
And I think a lot of that stuff, maybe unwittingly a little bit, and obviously I'm a little bit biased self-servingly to transacting value, but it has to come down to your value system.
Yeah.
Inadvertently or consciously, but either way, it has to come down to your value system, because how highly do you rank consideration? How highly do you rank courtesy? How highly do you rank humility and ownership or tact or tenacity or these other values, right, that may apply? Where I think, and this may sound ironic, your values don't have to define you, but they can totally refine you. And it's sort of like building a sandcastle in a tidal zone, right? Like, it's going to get fucked up.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's a matter of timing and tides, right? Your sandcastle is going to get destroyed, but because maybe, let's say, you value hard work and you're proud of what you accomplished and you want to be able to show it off and communicate whatever this design means to you in sand, that you still take the time to put in details.
Yeah.
There's a difference, I think, when you think about, I don't know, a 6-year-old on the playground building something. They're not really concerned with other people here may kick this over.
Right.
Still the level of detail and attention, right? And I think as adults, that sandcastle sort of metaphor is similar, except now we have awareness, or we could have awareness. Just because it gets knocked over doesn't mean we learned nothing and it was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Think about all the cool intricacies that you've learned to build into your style and your perspective and your ability to start, maintain, encourage, foster, end relationships with people.
Mhm.
as a result of 27 years
Mhm.
of practice,
Yeah.
right? I mean, man, you do anything now for 5 years and you've been doing it forever. It's
Right.
crazy. Jobs change so fast in this, I guess you could call it still a gig economy.
Oh, absolutely, and you gotta be able to adapt. Yeah.
Yeah, 20. Oh, man.
Yeah.
3 decades of your life honing lessons on how to communicate with people.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you almost didn't have a choice, in my opinion, but to perceive this experience from any other lens than, okay, well, how can I use this to somebody
That's
else's
right.
advantage? How do
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
how do I use this to help people?
Yeah.
It's
That
it's
was my
basically
go-to.
your
Yeah.
RNA right now.
Mhm. It's clear you love podcasts, or else you wouldn't be listening to this one. And you may have even thought about starting your own podcast, but you just don't know where to begin. I would like to invite you to try Alitu. It's an online platform that uses very simple drag and drop tools designed specifically for podcasters. You can record and edit an entire show in no time. I know because I've done it. Don't worry about buying special equipment either. Alitu automatically cleans your audio so you sound crisp and clean. So if you are thinking about starting a podcast, stop thinking and start doing by clicking on the link in the show notes. Yeah, that was my go-to. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I got to look at this through the lens of like, what are some things that I can learn from this, and then share it,
Yep.
because I'm not the only one who's going
Really
through
not.
this, who's going to go through this,
Yeah. No way.
who has gone through this.
No
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
you
and
said
growth.
something earlier. I wanted to touch on and kind of ask you as a follow-up question,
Mhm.
focusing on values.
Sure.
And one of the things you've asked me before when I was on your show, like how have my values changed, or if my values have changed over time, and you're right. The way we will perceive the importance, what level of importance, priority do we place on the values that we think are important to us?
Yeah.
Um, they absolutely have changed over time. Of course, when I was younger and in my early 20s, it was all about go after it and just get it. And it was all action and, damn the consequences. Just don't even worry about it. Just go for it. Right. Do it and then ask for forgiveness later. Right.
Yeah.
That was how we operated. Just don't ask permission. Just do it. And then you can ask for forgiveness later. That's why we learn so many lessons when we're younger, because that's
Yeah.
kind of how we operate. But now I can definitely see, even just through this past year with all of these changes that have occurred with me, I can definitely see my values shifting somewhat with wanting to be more purposeful. I think humility plays a huge part in how I want to move through the world. That wasn't the case even just a few years ago. But it's very much in the front of how I want to operate through life now is humility and intention, and just wanting to make sure that I can create something that is going to be of value for someone else. That is something that's kind of feeding my soul, right at the moment. I wanted to ask that question of you, since you've experienced so many changes from first beginning your podcast, and now, as a creator, you're getting into writing and you're developing all of these ideas. How has that shifted for you, over the past year or two since you've gotten into this space?
Dude, exponentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how to quantify how it shifted, right?
Hmm.
Exponentially. So when I first when I first started making videos for this brand, Survival Dead YT, I didn't know what I was doing.
Hmm.
I sort of just hit the button, launched the torpedoes, and full send.
Yeah.
Right. Matter of fact,
What
I'll
we
tell you
do,
this.
right?
That's
Just
it.
do it.
I didn't know what else to do. A lot of it was just because of, I guess, ignorance and inexperience, and maybe to a certain degree, maybe even just a willing omission of consequence.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you, the first video I put out, I can't even remember what it was called now, and it's on Survival Dad YT's YouTube. But I was in a car wash, and one of not the car wash you're on the conveyor belt and you're moving through, but the one you put in quarters and you do it yourself type car wash, right? Just a single bay sewer drain under your car. Well, so I put in quarters and I'm just talking to myself as I'm washing the car. And I had been toying with the idea of making videos, putting them on YouTube. I got a buddy, he goes by Tech Hustler, but he and I had talked a little bit. And he said, dude, tell me your ideas, try YouTube out, feel it out, blah, blah, blah. I told him the ideas, it bombed. And so I was just trying to build myself up and think about it. And then I was there at the car wash and I said, you know what, man, 50 cents in the machine, record on my phone. Here we go. Let's see where this goes. It was horrible. The message maybe, but it was forced. I was trying to be funny and I thought it was some sort of coy like delivery and that, oh, this would be cool because it'll be relatable and it looks real because it's me on my phone behind my steering wheel in the car and it's super cool. And obviously everybody else doing these things, I'm going to get thousands of views. No, everything about it was horrible. The experience, whatever anxiety I had socially, even just trying to come up with what I was going to say hastily after I hit record. It was like 30 seconds of, I feel pretty good about this. I know exactly what I'm going to say. Record. Fuck.
Yeah. You know? It left the building.
Oh, man. It was such a horrible experience. But looking back, I learned a lot from it. And it was the first step, right? And you just got to just lean and put a foot forward and see where it goes, you know? And so it was pivotal for me. But at that point in time, I said, okay, what are some of my values? What values can I attribute to Survival Dad YT at the time, more specifically? And I said, well, compassion and competence and loyalty, these types of things, maybe conviction I had in the beginning as well, right? And I said, well, I'm going to see it through, but I couldn't define those words to you.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what I was going to do with them, right? Matter of fact, we talked about them back, August, I think you said it was. And great. Cool. Hey, you got values. Hey, now I'm talking about values. Continuity. What are you doing, dude? No. Right. And it was just forced and it showed from the videos through probably about the first, well, at the very least, what I considered season 1 of the podcast as well. Audio quality wasn't there. Well, how am I going to talk about competence when you can't hear me well? Right? This is now a podcast and my audio quality is trash. Or topics. I'll tell you this, I didn't choose topics until after I recorded the conversations. There was zero prep work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, it can't be that complicated. I'll talk about stuff I know.
Right.
Stupid complicated. That was a horrible idea. Right? Here's another one. I couldn't figure out how to get people who were interested to come on the podcast because I didn't even know what I was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
The clarity, I mean, not specifically the topics, but the clarity even. I didn't know how to convey any of it. I was like, let's just talk about whatever. As long as you say values, I say values, we got values together. Like, what am I doing? And so nobody would come on the show. So season 1, I was interviewing myself. I created these characters and personalities to interview. I gave them my problems.
Right.
And then I talked to them about us. Right. And I don't know. I still like the concept, but the way I executed it, competence.
Yeah.
How can you say you know what you're doing when it clearly sounds like you don't? Was in hindsight, what I've sort of grown on over the last year. And so to sum all that up, I suppose, I learned that the values I initially ascribed to be part of this Survival Dad YT brand weren't as genuine to me. But more importantly, I don't think I really knew what they were for me. And experiential learning I brought up earlier. I value that pretty highly now because I've started to realize the stuff I try to read in books, my reading comprehension is not that high. Right. So I may read a paragraph 7 or 8 times and then realize I got 0. I'll try it tomorrow and then forget I picked up the book. Like it's not there.
Mhm.
Even auditory learning, my attention span's only so long. So then I zone out for what now? I'm missing half the message. Okay. Well, so I listen to your podcast, I take notes.
Yeah. Mm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so then, but I'm doing it. I'm processing and I'm not quoting what you say. I'm interpreting it and writing my notes
Right. Right.
based on your thought, right? So
Yeah.
it sort of gives me a rehearsal to experience in a manner of speaking what I'm hearing interpreted and be able to use it. And
Right.
so experiential learning is something I didn't really consider before because I hadn't thought about it. Or creativity, right?
Yeah.
I was almost hesitant to accept any sort of creative role because I didn't have any self-confidence. My
Mhm.
self-esteem was trash.
Mhm.
And we're talking just like in the last year. I'm
Yeah.
35 years old now.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
3 decades of life and you're not confident, you don't know what you bring to the table. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's sure, I guess I had clues, but I didn't pay attention to them, right? Like, oh God, Colonel Mustard in the library the whole time. I had, I had nothing.
Yeah.
So, finding ways to put that into these books I'm working on or put that into this brand. Jane, look, I made a hat. You know?
Branding.
Right. Yes, victory. I I didn't know. I just didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I did know. I didn't know how to do any of it or put any of it together. I just didn't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so owning some level of creativity,
Mhm.
right, wrong, indifferent, effective or ineffective, just owning the fact that, you know what, man, you did come up with something.
Yeah. That's right.
There are some things here that are
Mhm.
resonating with people, and now my numbers are going up. Clarity is proving to be more effective.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to pick 3 values that have changed for me, experiential learning and creativity would probably be the top 2. And I'd say probably the third is consideration, sort of like we talked
Mhm.
about with my editor earlier.
Yeah.
Just identifying that I may be a voice in the room, but I'm certainly not the only one.
That's right.
It's like we don't go through life together. We grow through life together, but separately.
That's right. Mhm.
And I think it took me a while to grasp that. More importantly, it took an active role for me to identify it though,
Mhm.
and not just jellyfish my way past it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, my values definitely have changed. And a lot of it was due to experience and
Mhm.
awareness of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And the intentionality of just like you mentioned, listening to something and writing down notes and
Mhm.
interpreting what it is that you're listening to.
Yeah.
That is a skill. I mean, listening is a skill. Look, even if you are trying to pay attention, the research shows us you're paying attention, right? You're actively listening. You're still only getting half of what's coming at you. 50%, 50, half.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we are naturally terrible at listening. And so it does take work, it takes effort, to be able to get better at that skill. And by you being able to recognize, let me get out a piece of paper. I'm going to listen and then I'm going to translate what I'm hearing so that I can
Mhm.
make sure, not only can I make sure I'm understanding it, but by doing this, I'm going to be more apt to remember it, as
Sure.
well. I mean, that right there is such a important skill to be more effective at communicating. If there's like one thing that I would suggest somebody work on today, that would be it. On that part of the listening, just listening to understand and take notes and see if your interpretation, is matching up with what the meaning of whatever it is that you're listening to. Uh,
That's
mhm,
that's a great point. I mean, we're talking about obviously listening to podcasts, but
mhm,
you had a guy on recently, Robbie Samuels. I don't
mhm.
remember what you called the conversation or the episode. I'm sorry. And Robbie, sorry, man, but your message was great. And one of the points he brought up, I can't even remember when it was now, but either way, not important. One of the points he brought up was the art of the schmooze or the art
Yeah,
of schmoozing or something.
that's right. That's
Oh
right.
man,
Yeah.
I tried to search if anything like that existed, but I didn't know how to spell it, so I gave up. Um, but I always sort of attributed that to like sweet talking, small talking, like
Uh-huh.
unimportant conversation, impertinent conversation, I guess you could say,
Mhm.
but it's
Yeah.
not.
No, it's
It's
not.
ridiculously relevant, right? And I think one of the points he brought up was, for example, networking events. He said, draft up a follow-up email before you go to the event.
Mhm. Yeah. How
Well,
brilliant is that, right?
I well,
Like,
on one hand, but on the other hand, oh my God, what do I put in it? I don't know
right?
what I'm gonna read. I don't know what I'm gonna say. But so this nonfiction series I'm working on right now is
Mhm.
called Intention, and
Mm.
thinking it'll be probably 4 books, right?
Yeah.
And so one that I'm working on at present is intentional communication.
Mhm.
And so, how do you plan generically enough, or
Mhm.
let's say plan generically enough
Mhm.
to prepare well enough to talk to anybody specifically about anything?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you prepare well enough to give people what they want when you haven't met them yet?
Right.
Oh,
Right.
man. And so, drafting this follow up email, for example, before you go to the event, well, it's exactly like you brought up.
Mhm.
Think through types of people, characteristics, profiles, concepts
Mhm.
that might occur, come up in conversation, or actually be on the receiving end of your conversation.
Yeah.
And then just say thank you, or we'll be in
Mhm.
touch, or close it out generically however you want. But it gives you an opportunity, like in weightlifting, like in competition sports, any other number of arenas, to visualize what you want to happen,
That's
to meet your expectations, at the very least, to create your expectations.
that's right.
And then you're more likely to be successful. And I think a lot of that is underrated,
Oh, yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And man, and he really did. He put it so well. It it doesn't even have to be really that in depth. It does
Mhm.
have to be that intentional though.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has to be realistic too, to just go in there and say, "Hey, I'm going to make sure that I meet 100 people and I'm going to exchange business cards with 100 people." It's
Yeah.
like, well, number why?
Yeah.
What is the whole point? Just to
Sure.
say that you did it, that's really not. How is that going to propel you forward? What is the goal behind that?
Yeah.
What is that meeting? What kind of need is that meeting? Or it that doesn't make sense to go
Right.
about it that way. So of course, when you attend these events, that's why you're not going to get anything out of it, because it was just an unrealistic goal that you set and there was really no intention behind it anyway. Like, truly, what's the purpose behind
Well,
doing?
I mean, that's where it comes down to, in some part, small or large, authenticity, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I talked to a guy back, I think it was in January of this year,
Mhm.
Gary Wayne, on transacting value.
Mhm.
And before we hit record, he asked me a question, and I'm paraphrasing, but he asked me a question. He said, "So when you say values, what do you mean?"
Mhm.
Not specifically, what are my values? That's not how I
Mhm.
took it, anyways.
Yeah.
But when you say values, what do you mean?
Mhm.
So my answer was examples, right? List a couple
Yeah.
words like these. I don't know what I said, but as an example, humility, gratitude, appreciation, courage. And his response, and I quote, "Josh, son, those aren't values." And I said, "Oh no, I've been doing this all wrong." What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Um, and we worked around it, right, and
Yeah.
figured out a way to work it, and now he's officially a contributor on the show.
Yeah.
But I think what it did for me was understand that values help to ground the growth of your character,
Yeah.
right? So if you think through a networking event, for example, a conversation, a board meeting, and let's put corporate offices out of the way for a minute. It's a
Mhm.
family reunion. It's show and tell in first, second grade to your
Mhm.
classmates. It's you in a college classroom or a TEDx stage, wherever.
Mhm.
But the way people perceive you before you show up, in large
Mhm.
part, is based on your reputation.
Yeah.
The way that people perceive you after you leave, in large part, is based on your character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so if you find a way to more authentically represent what your values are and what you actually put some stock into,
Mhm.
well, the 80% of communicating that happens to be nonverbal will speak louder than what you say anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people will see that and they'll respond however they respond. But at least no matter what the conversation is and how the event goes, you'll be able to sleep better at night, if
Yeah.
nothing else.
Yeah.
You know?
And really what you're talking about here, there are two different meanings that come about whenever we have a conversation with someone. We're going to have the content level meaning, and then we have the relational level meaning. Like earlier,
What do you
you
mean?
had mentioned having like chit chat, that superficial,
Yeah.
kind of chit chat that on the surface we may think it's really not a big deal, right? It doesn't matter. But when you think about the content level meaning of that chit chat, what's your favorite movie, or who's your favorite star, or what's your favorite genre, or Marvel versus DC, whatever it is, the content, the information that you're exchanging, that's one level. But then the other level of it is the relational. We're taking the time to get to know one another. We're taking the time to engage in this conversation. We're actually in this together, learning and exploring. The relational message is that I care enough about you. I want to get to know you. I'm spending my time with you, and I'm asking these questions. That's what's developing, that relational level of meaning. And so those tiny moments, while on the surface they may seem like they don't matter, but really at the end of the day, and I think that's what you're talking about, the difference between that content level meaning and the relational level meaning, every one of these moments. And I think that ties into, when we talk about values as well, being able to recognize that if you truly want to create a space where you can have meaningful conversations and develop a relationship with someone, you have to be mindful of the relational part of that message. Imagine your favorite online dating app, but instead of using it for finding dates, you are booking podcasting interviews. Podmatch uses similar technology to match the ideal podcast host with the ideal podcast guest for interviews. I know it works because that's how I get so many awesome guests for my show. I used to spend hours scouring my social media channels, hoping to be able to find just one reliable guest for my show. Now I simply log into Podmatch and let the program do all the work. It really is just that easy. And if you are a podcaster looking for compatible guests, or you are a guest looking to be on a reputable podcast, sign up for Podmatch today by clicking on the link in the show notes.
Man, see, this is why I keep paper here when you talk. This is it right here. This is live action, folks. Live action.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah.
But the thing is I see you're already employing that, though. I mean, you're already doing that in your conversations, that when you have these conversations about values. The only difference is because I come from a background in communication, like I studied this stuff.
Right.
I'm just able to pinpoint, that's what it is, and just put a label on it. But you're actively doing it, like you're actually doing it, and you're learning how to do it, day to day.
But Jen, the labels aren't always bad, right? And it's sort of like we've been talking about, labels, on down to like the Marie Kondo application of labels. That's good too. I'm sure it's got its place, ironically enough, but awareness of what's happening around you and being able to qualify that with some sort of a label in a language, in a wording, in a methodology that you can process, whoever you are. For example, see, you said it in your trailer again that, I forget how you worded it exactly, but like we all have our own journey was essentially what we're hitting on. And I agree, right? You have to. In that, my buddy David, I think I brought him up before we started recording this, but my buddy David, he's an author out of SoCal.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentioned, or I guess we mentioned in our conversation on the podcast, that each character that you create in a story, inadvertently, no matter how much you avoid it, is going to have a little bit of the author,
Sure.
essentially.
Yeah.
In each character, maybe entirely different pieces in each character, right? I've talked to a couple authors at this point, David and Cindy and a few others, and they've all said similarly same things like, I don't like these things, but that character does. However, that character responds a certain way to these prompts, and turns out I do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And I think some of that, for example, also applies to like perception of certain words.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like for me, when I personally, when I say family, I think, okay, well, the collective of people you're born into,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's my baseline.
Mm-hmm.
In hindsight and over time, and I'm sure for plenty other people, that definition and that qualification of family isn't applicable. Maybe they had a shitty home life.
Yeah.
Right. I had a lady named Debbie come on the show, and we talked about foster families,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of working through that type of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, see, but if the qualification of family is who you're born into, well, then a foster family isn't a term that exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then becoming more aware that family is also who we create,
Mm-hmm.
not who creates us,
Mm-hmm.
but who we create and who we're able to trust and build confidence in and around and with,
Mm-hmm.
and share memories with. This sort of attribution of family, the label of family, changes and grows, right?
Yep.
And
You're
so,
making me think of Vin Diesel. Fast
yeah,
and Furious.
I knew it was going to come up. I was trying to avoid it, but I guess it was. Yeah, so not to get all Dom on this, but like, but as an example, right? Like sometimes labels are good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes they have merit and they have value, and I think it's just important to say right now, because I feel like, when we say social media, I'm not talking about Twitter and Facebook and whatever specific platform. I mean, like whatever medium people are using to be social media. If you say label now, it's race related,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and it pulls in this negative connotation when it doesn't have to,
Right.
right? It's just, how do I describe something that I think you will understand better because I don't have the words to do it? So I'm going to call it this thing. Can we agree that this thing looks like this? Yes. Okay. Well, now we have something in common.
Yeah.
I prefer to do that with values, because that shit's abstract. I don't know oh man, here's what abundance looks like to me. Well,
that's total perspective right there. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Here's what courtesy looks like to me, or compassion looks like to me, or adventure looks like to me. And you're like, no, that's Tuesday, that's selfishness, and that's inconsiderate.
Yeah.
Well, now what? Right.
That's why specificity does matter in the language that we use. It does, because, if I ask you, hey, I'm in the market to get a car, I'm looking for a cheap car.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your definition of cheap, your understanding of what is cheap could be completely different from my understanding of what is cheap. I could go up to somebody and they'll be like, oh yeah, there's a car over here. I mean, it's only 40 grand. And I could be like, what?
Yeah.
That ain't cheap. Right.
Yeah.
I was talking about like 3 grand. Right. That's
exactly.
Completely. It's all about the perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
well,
right.
it has to be.
Specificity matters. It really does.
Yeah. The cool thing about that journey, though, is, at least in my opinion and in my, professional experience, like you can't dismantle to any degree of effect an ideology.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can. Maybe somebody out there knows. Leave some comments, whatever, let us know. But I don't think so, right? you can influence it, you can impact it, you can obviously sway it one way or another, or somebody's ideology wouldn't have grown to that point to begin with. But you want to talk about hearts and minds, man, we had it wrong in 04. We had it wrong since then, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know any better at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we had it wrong. It's not necessarily candy bars and food and shelter and fresh water. Those things play a role, right? And those things help. But what are we really conveying?
Mm-hmm.
Our money fixes your problems. And so what happens when our money's not there? Well, the problems still are.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so how do we, I don't know, increase self-reliance? How do we show people that self-esteem has value?
Mm-hmm.
How do we convey to somebody that your values are valid?
Yeah.
I don't need to agree with them, right? I'm not saying that this is some I don't know, Miss America answer, and no offense to Miss America pageants, but a lot of those answers are kind of lofty, not really rooted in much usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that talking about values is going to pay the electric bill. I'm not saying that an increased awareness on how highly you value loyalty is going to get you groceries.
Right.
But understanding what you value gives you an opportunity to perceive the world a bit differently. Mm-hmm. And then you red gem that glove and you're like, okay, maybe my reality is bearable.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the first step. That's where you lean in and you just catch yourself with whichever foot hits first. Right? Hashtag left foot, kill foot. But it just goes there. You know what I mean? And that's it. And then after that, well, now you've got momentum moving forward. There's a lady I talked to named Stephanie. She runs a, oh man, what am I trying to say? She's the host of a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Man, Steph, I'm sorry. Empowered PR, Empowered Author Podcast.
Okay.
Anyways, so she said, everybody falls.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to us to determine, do you fall forwards or do you fall backwards?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if you can at least identify in my self-serving bias that your values are your values and that you can totally communicate them, cherish them, and heal from them, well, then you're usually always going to fall forward.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point, you can climb up, you can move forward, you can run, you can low crawl, you can do whatever you want in a forward, more positive direction with somebody else or on your own, and I think a lot of that growth with other people always benefits you somehow. Mm-hmm. A lot of that growth in your own head by yourself always influences other people. It's contagious. And it may not fix the world's problems. It's not going to create world peace. It's not a cure-all for anything. But it helps.
But I think if more of us could learn to look within ourselves and first be able to identify what those values are, and then how do we go about communicating or expressing those values to those around us, right? How are we using those to help us connect with others? I think that's a huge step in the right direction. You're right. I mean, we're not going to solve the world's problems, but it could be, just one relationship at a time. Really, that's ultimately what it's about. And in understanding that communication will not solve every problem.
Oh, man, Jen, say it ain't so.
Communication will not solve every problem. Effective communication can help you learn to recognize the problem and then also recognize that in this one instance, this might be one of those things that it's not fixable. And what communication is helping me do is to not only learn to read it for what it is and then understand it, but now I know maybe now's the time for me to pivot. Maybe now's the time for me to, stop doing what I'm doing now, quick hitting my head up against this brick wall, and make some different choices. Yeah. So I think it's important to also remember that aspect as well about communication. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you one of the most frustrating things I had as a kid was trying to get through, and I've still never done this. Let me just put it out there publicly. Is trying to get through 52 cards in one house.
Yeah.
Never, not one time. Not one time. They'd always fall down.
That's right.
I convinced myself, and maybe to a certain degree, up until this conversation, I think I'm starting to lose hope. But I convinced myself for a
Keep
while.
hope alive.
Yeah, I convinced myself for a while that there were aspects of this failed card house that were effective. It was the other elements that made them ineffective. So it was just poorly, proportioned or whatever. But I always had the most success in realizing I can continue using the same cards, but it's totally okay to use a different design in the process.
That's right.
And I think regardless of what topics we apply that to, conversations and communication in your case, divorce in our cases, values in my case, character development, or anything in between, we're not broken. We're still the same cards.
Yeah.
Right? But like every good deck has 2 or 3 jokers. You know what I'm saying? You just figure out how to use them.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's okay. And I think that awareness and learning to communicate it, even if you're only communicating to yourself, changes the world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important person you need to communicate with is yourself.
Yeah.
Be real. Be real about it. Yeah. Yeah. No bullshit. Don't try to bullshit yourself or anybody else.
It's not going to work, right? Eventually it washes off. It may take decades. It may take days. Maybe it's in hindsight and you're 85.
Yeah.
But eventually you look back and you're like, I fucked that up a little bit.
Yeah. Sure did.
Yeah. And that happens, right? That's how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of that, or I'm hoping a lot of that, you're gonna go more into it. You talked a little bit about, before we got on here, you talked a little bit about your Untying the Knot miniseries.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm stoked, man. It's all about conflict and communication and like novella drama with all the enticement.
Right. That's right. Stay tuned.
Yeah. No, I think it's going to be cool, because
all of the juicy self revelations.
Yeah, but in real time, like you're processing now, and that those aren't topics that get publicized as often,
right?
And man, especially in long form video like this, think about what goes on to TikTok or what goes on to Instagram or Facebook Reels, right? Yeah. It's generally speaking, not saying it's only, but generally speaking, stuff that's not going to help you work through those.
No.
Probably not. Some things, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Not a lot of it, right? So, finding opportunities to put that information out and then be willing to accept a little bit of vulnerability. I think Dan Coyle called it a vulnerability loop. You put a little bit out there in the world. Eventually people catch on and it promulgates itself. And I think it pays dividends. Yeah. Hands down. So whenever you decide to get that mini series out, I'm looking forward to it. I suspect. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the preview of that.
Not to stay trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Josh, we could talk all damn day. I know you and I we could have conversations that will just never, ever end. I cannot believe, it's been over an hour already that we've been having this conversation. Before we start wrapping it up, is there anything that we said we were going to talk about that we didn't get to yet? Because I know we talked about this before we hit record.
Yeah.
What did we forget?
That's a great point. I think we covered everything. I'm looking at like 20 different Post-it notes, but I think we got everything we said we wanted to. Yeah. Comprehending or learning to comprehend yourself and communicate it effectively, that sort of self-literacy, I think goes far in empowering yourself, empowering other people, your overall character development, values-based, intentional type living and its application is, that's everything we know is the short answer. No,
Yeah.
we talked about all of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. And I hope the listeners, there were some golden nuggets in there, y'all. So I hope that you took the time, listen all the way through, talking about long form communication, right? Yeah. Going for over an hour. This ain't TikTok. This isn't just a 5-second thing. There are a lot of meaningful messages that I think you have to be willing to take the time to have these conversations in order to get to those meaningful conversations. And I just appreciate you taking the time, not only just coming back on the show, but being a little vulnerable yourself, being willing to answer the questions and share your ups and downs, the challenges, the lessons learned, because at the end of the day, that's what communication is all about. None of us are perfect. It's all a journey. And Lord knows we are definitely, sometimes we're on the road. Sometimes we get off the road. We're on a path. Sometimes it's gravel, sometimes there's no path and we're just kind of bumping along and hitting trees and all kinds of shit, getting in the way. That's just the way it goes. I appreciate you sharing that with the audience and just, helping us learn and grow with you. It's fantastic.
Goes both ways.
Yeah.
You got, like I said earlier, you don't have to go it alone, but you can grow alone together.
Yeah.
So
love it. Love it. All right. So tell us how to contact you.
Yeah, man. So for everybody listening, I've got a website now, transactingvaluepodcast.com. You can stop by there, check it out. You can find on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Search Transacting Value Podcast or Survival Dad YT. In either case, it'll come up on any of those platforms, and obviously on the website, all the social links are there as well. Emails, survivaldadyt@gmail.com. That's an easy way to communicate. And you know what? If you prefer not to type, I just figured this out recently. You can drop a voicemail also on the website and record a quick review audibly or a message audibly on the website also.
Is that right?
Super cool.
I had no idea that was something. I'm going to have to look at that myself.
Yeah, super cool.
How awesome is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, you know what? I learned something new every damn day. Every damn day. Super cool. I'll make sure to put all of that in the show notes, all the links. So again, if you don't want to type everything out, just go into the show notes and click on the link, and that'll make it easy as well. And then you can leave your voicemail.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right, everybody. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. I hope you got some good information out of this, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review.